Okay, join me here for a minute to look back in time, well before any time that we usually talk about on the channel. I've had a few moments in it, but along with all my studies, quite often I'll look at other subjects. I've got to get off of it to come back and get back on it sometimes, and that helps to bring about revelations that were right in front of me and I couldn't see it because I was so trapped up in all of this crap. We're so lucky to be living in this modern time. I think it's incredible to have been on the age of science and coming out of that with utilizing it after the Industrial Revolution and what we have now, going from the infinite and smallest atoms, finding now that those are actually built of quarks and some other stuff, and now they have found the God particle, as they say, that imparts weight upon things. Because it really seems strange looking at the periodic table that you would find things that were right next to each other that are all of a sudden gained mass like crazy from apparently just grabbing another electron and a proton, if you will, or whatever. To the immense and infinite size of our galaxy. And the wonders it all holds within it. But then there are billions and billions of galaxies, not to steal from Carl Sagan, in our universe as we know it. Astronomy has been something that Caucasians and eventually all of mankind got going on thousands and thousands of years ago, and we can even see ideals in that in Göbekli Tepe and even back through old cave paintings and things that I've done other videos about, where they deciphered other parts of it and they know it's about these animals mating and all things and what time they go on. Time plays an important role in all of this. It's strange, whenever you're a kid, you can't really understand the idea of a few hundred years. And as you mature, you get this idea of the way that it all laid out. And if you study history, you might be able to get a few thousand years grasp on it. But then science has trumped so many of the things that may have been thought in mythologies and religions and so on, that it no longer holds its value that it did before, but people still try to take and grasp out at things and say, well, instead of let there be light being just our sun, which we were all centered around everything whenever these tales came about in the first place, that somehow that must have been the whole Big Bang and we weren't really sure, or there was even some type of mistranslation on what God was supposedly talking about. Make all kinds of apologetics. I did a recent video that was just me rambling on the idea that God has just faded away as reality and science has taken over. And I think everybody that thinks about that can actually see that totally happening, and God ends up becoming the God of the gaps. If we don't have an idea of what creates the spark to do this, that, and the other, then that's got to be God. And slowly but surely, as we find out things onto it, it's all connected too. And you're eventually left with the idea that, well, God just set it all up like a magic clock and got it going, and he ain't been around. Surely in the universe that we see, in the galaxies and millions of stars, and now we know there are so many planets that are similar to ours, that this Fermi paradox idea and this equation that they had, the Drake equation of old, would actually be a much higher number now, because we were giving, what if 1 in a million had a planet that was around it that was somewhat the size of ours and distance away in a Goldilocks zone. And after looking at the small percentage we have, we've already found that that number beats it by far. And so somebody made the comment whenever I was a child about this, trying to decipher out what that would actually mean, because they were trying to figure out how many stars were in our galaxy, and then actually ratio off of those which ones are actually a yellowish red star like ours that creates full light or whatever, but one that would be like ours, although if there was a bigger or brighter sun, it could be farther away and still in a Goldilocks zone. But omitting all those out, we drew into the fact of, well, there's got to be at least 10,000 planets that are just like, if not identical, almost in every way to our own, after plugging it through that. Now, that ruins religion too, and so somehow science that we all know about and share suddenly becomes not really embraced. And the scientists that are going through all this have to really set that aside and go for the truth. I feel like I've gone off in left field here a little bit, and perhaps a little too much. And just a starting concept idea, this is a picture of the Big Bang, or a representation of the Big Bang, and there would have been a cold galaxy, or gold cosmos and universe at this point that we're looking at. We only in the early 1920s, through Edwin Hubble, that's the reason we have the Hubble Space Telescope, figured out there was a slight redshift in these galaxies that had all burst out, and they were all around us. But strangely, they're not static like we had always pretty much envisioned and thought. They're actually moving. In fact, some of them faster than others. And due to the redshift, like a Doppler effect, luckily we'd already figured that out with trains coming by and changing sounds and how it compresses and things, that this universe is expanding. And a lot of it's going far away from us. And so if we don't get on the move towards one of these galaxies that's even one of the ones that's close to us, in a short amount of time from now, which still can be represented within thousands of years, of course, then we're almost not going to have the shot at it. And I made a video a long time ago about a generational spacecraft that we're eventually going to have to build. There's no other way. And get people headed off to where generations and generations later, no matter how fast we get the idea of going on and whipping around the planets in a certain way and then zooming out, and then trying to aim it as you're hurling as fast as we've ever gone towards just a nearby star that we think that has a planet around it, not out of our galaxy. That would be an amazing feat, but we need to go, if we're going to check out any other galaxies ever and spread out in that manner, we're going to have to do that right off the bat here within these next few thousand years to 10,000 years or so on, because it's projected a lot of these cosmoses are fleeting our vision, being able to see. They get out past that point. And so now we kind of get back to the point here of the cosmos, or universe, if you will, in its entirety being supposedly some 14 billion years. Then it became 14.2, and after they had Hubble going and things with data, they said, well, maybe 14.6 because of all the deep field shots they had gotten, and that's just about it. Well, time has happened during all of this, and so you're not going to see, they tell you the light from that came from 14.6 billion years ago, and it's just finally reaching here, and there's already a galaxy forming. So we're not able to look back past that point in any way, shape, or form. People started saying whenever the new James Webb came up, we'd be able to look a lot farther. Not really so, but due to the fact that it does check out the infrared and red spectrums off that, which is what the Doppler shift affects with, it might be able to see some things that are barely, if not visible, quite clearly. And since everything out at the distance is pretty much red shifted, it works fantastic in that endeavor. It's cool how they hooked it up to work and then to hide behind the moon. And but this picture that's right here is just after the Big Bang, right? Here, let's get to the point, right? This is right after the Big Bang. They say just seconds after it exploded that it got out to a certain region, and then everything started drifting from there like ink in a water, if you will, and it slowly starts spreading out. But due to the congelation, that formed little things, and they hooked all together, and then that blurred out, and then all those little bumps that started showing up ended up being basically all the galaxies. And then it's accelerating somehow, they're saying. There's also this thought of dark energy, because with the way that it's going, there has to be more gravity than what there is, or we don't have an exact equation that just fits everything. But in certain situations, like say at the edge or inside a black hole and things like that, the laws of physics go out the rules fly out the window in many cases, right? Okay. Now, we can roll it back to close to this time, because in the 1920s, when Hubble found out all this, they started figuring out trajectories and so on of these galaxies, and that suddenly became an idea where you can actually track them back and see where they're coming from. And instead of being willy-nilly all over the place somehow, they almost seem to converge on an exact point back at one point, and that's what we're looking at now. In reverse and stopped it, right? Now, everybody gets in a tizzy about nowadays with string theories and all these other things and quantum physics, and oh my gosh, about how this could have come from nothing. And so here's God or whatever off of it, and how much does he have to do with us? If we're the byproduct of the byproduct of the byproduct of the clock that got kicking that somebody turned on, how does that work? Here's one thing I want you to think about is it never became a singularity. In the vastness of space, it surely became what we would consider something like a singularity. But if they were all coming back at once, believe it or not, before they all got back over the same spot, and there were still galaxies headed that way, it would have done the greatest of all explosions. There's no way to describe it. A black hole eating a black hole has no bearing on this whatsoever. We're looking at hundreds of billions of black holes. Every galaxy has a black hole in it. Hundreds of billions of black holes converging on a spot. And at the point they started consuming each other, as they were coming in on each other, before the thing ever blew up, before it was even considered a singularity, all of these things got to a point that, just like we see where a sun as big as ours can end up going out and turning into this kind of dead star, but if you get a huge enough one, it can form a black hole and neutron stars. All these different things go on out of it, right? Well, you put a bunch of those together, converging on each other, and it'll make a black hole. And just a side note, I've always thought here, once they give us that idea and they say it sucks all this stuff in, I'm like, well, there's where all your dark matter is. So that black hole has a whole lot more power than we think, huh? And it's sucking in things like a planet eater in old Star Trek or something. No, it's much bigger than that. And it's the center of all the galaxies. But if you start multiplying those all together, and you think this vision here is looking something like a nebula, that's what it looks like to me anyhow, which is the dying of one star. And you think of the idea of a black hole being hundreds of thousands of these collective in, and all of a sudden now they become a vacuum and start sucking into them. So much gravity from what we know of everything else having that light can't even escape from its surface. Although at the very top you can find that they're spinning definitely like a basketball on your finger, and out the top and out the bottom, because sometimes things get consumed, it's too much to eat, and it burps and comes out the other end too, and you'll see those vents going through. But this idea of having a singularity and everything comes from nothing or whatever is not the way that it works out. And I've seen some Bible apologists try to pull this off of like, well, you don't know anyhow and stuff. And it's like, well, one thing we're sure of, there's not a giant sky god like Santa Claus watching all over us and doing this, that, and the other, and da-da-da. We've already been well past that. In fact, the Earth was created in a much different point than 4000 BC. Here's a fossil. And it gets to the point where it all falls apart, and so man's beliefs on things. It's amazing what they did know, and special numbers that they picked out that had to go with things like our sun, and it's 432, and then A, the sound and stuff, and then people have taken and figured out, well, the sound of the sun works with that, reverberating in our planet, and we're together all like a chord on a guitar or on a piano, which every note is built on sacred geometry, all the way back from who knows when, but the Earth in its solar system is 4.32 billion years ago. And that's whenever let there be light, instead of 4,000. And it isn't in 4032 or whatever. And you could say BC and get it off that, but then when did you date the BC date and the AD and situation? It falters off of that. But all of our time also is connected to this, and this idea of a 360 degree circumference. I've got a lot of videos about this. I don't want to go into too deep on it, but the time in seconds itself and the way that it all works out works with the cosmos. But things fall apart, of course, whenever they get something like this. In fact, again, this is billions of black holes converging on a point. Now, so before it ever went boom, it converged on a point. And I don't know if there's ever going to be a point that it stops of our expanding that we have now and then starts backing back up, and this goes in a mode like that. Or the last time that the universe tried to be created, gravity was a stronger force than it is. Gravity is a weak force now. It's been one of the things that have freaked scientists out, and the idea and how it all fits into the giant equation of everything. But if gravity was just a hair of a percentage stronger than it is now, almost where you couldn't detect it, you could just say that guy that jumped 30 foot one time would have only jumped about 27, 28. Just that much more gravity, and none of this stuff would have been escaping each other. In fact, it wouldn't be expanding away from each other, but trapped and then pulled back in by a vacuum. And as it reaches itself in the center again, it explodes again. And because of this immense power that's going on here, with all the black holes that had ever been created, just like in our universe, which may be just one of a few, but anyhow, that's one way to say that it's speeding up, because things at the edge of our distance are so spread apart, but they're racing towards another place that has much more gravity than that that's behind him, and it seems odd when you try to figure it that way. But back to it again. When things converged all in, when it becomes this singularity, it starts squeezing on itself. I'm telling you, it didn't even squeeze on itself. I'm telling you that a galaxy in this picture would be just a dot, one of the little bitty dots. Each one of those is a galaxy with a black hole on it. And so before it even got to be totally a singularity, with everything that went on, there got to be enough power in the center of that, all simultaneously exploding and swallowing, and it just wham, and it is the Big Bang. But now's another theory and thought on this whole concept, because we know if you even just get close to a black hole, that starts to cause extreme time dilation. They had a movie about it not too long ago, and that guy's kid was his grandma by the time he got back and didn't even spend that much time. And so there's all these ideas on how somebody could stretch out time or do things like that. And I want you to imagine that whenever this was all coming back together, like in the picture that we see here, that time would have been extremely distorted. And as it started to suck back in, not exploding as it is now, which I caught in a frame, but in reverse, trying to do that, would have been from the outside, say where we are now, which, if these are billions of galaxies, this is something that's happening not on top of us, but way the hell over there. But because of this effect, you can sure see it going on. That from our point of view and the time we have going, of course it's distorted by this whole endeavor that's going on here. But the people that would be, or whatever, is being sucked into this point as it's getting ready to just explode and come past us. Time would have slowed down to the point of literally creeping to nothing. You've seen representations in almost a comedy representation, to where whenever they turn their head, like in Contact, and everything warps over time and all these things, or that people's eyes are moving around, but then their body is just moving real slow. In fact, it's so slow you can't detect it unless you're stuck there too, looking exactly here, and you can slowly seeing something that's slower than the sun coming overhead, drastically drawn down. Well, that's just around one black hole. Can you imagine billions of them compiling onto each other? And so you have to get an astronomical point to where it's one of those unreal things with a decimal point and how many O's? Oh my God, it's O to the 16th power, 01. Compared to our current time we have going on now in our realm of the universe, the way it's all working out, time and so on, right? You follow me? Hopefully so. So whenever this goes off in the Big Bang, it may have been about 14.68 thousand or billion years ago that this all went on. But that's just the edge of it that we can see. And whenever we're using these newest telescopes looking there, we're like, these are winking out to us, and there's a time point there. And so we're looking at the distance that we can look at farthest things like a shotgun shell. Somehow our telescopes are so powerful, we're looking at somebody shooting a dove at 100 yards away, and they follow that with their badass telescope until the nth degree here, and then they wink out and you can't see the dots anymore. There's no way for it to go on. So we easily could be much older than that, but we do know these ones that are close to us and not so far out still converge on that point, and they come out of that point. It's one of the things that gives us the idea that it's all expanding so much, because, well, and another way to look at it is, if you poured a bunch of pepper in a swimming pool that's not moving and it's stagnant, it's space, you pour that in the middle of it, slowly over time, that's going to spread out on there, but it's going to be a lot slower. And as it starts to accelerate away, it's accelerating from each other. Remember an old experiment which you had that going on? What is it? You dropped a pinch of baking soda and they all went and you shot to the side? Irregardless. So, how long has the universe that we're in been around? Because the singularity was created from a mass pileup from all the stuff from before, converging on itself back in time. All we got to do is just roll it back. And they're like, and it gets to a point and we don't know what the hell's going on. Well, that everything doesn't come from nothing. If we'll just go, and instead of putting magic into it, if we put reality in the situation, everything doesn't come from nothing. It comes from everything all packed up on itself like hell. We see that in a much more finite, small way, looking at the sun, and everybody realizing now that all these major elements that we have in us are from suns dying from a long time before, and have created swirls of stars that ended up becoming our solar system and let there be light again. And we may not be even on our first conjunctive there. I mean, what didn't all happen just from one thing, and we made a nebula and then that congealed, but more than one, converging on each other, are created in the same area again from stuff and doing it again. We found that we do have a nebula area around us, and there's all that Oort cloud and everything else. So yeah, it's not nowhere near as old as this type of idea we're going in with, but these physicists and guys that are working on this idea got to the point here, and they said, when time slows down, well, towards something like this, time would slow down to the point that it would be unviewable. It would slow down the speed of light to the point that you could actually see the grains of it. Instead of it flying by constantly in your eyes and doing anything, you can actually see the grains of it. If you were somehow free from this effect, watching it, checking it out, like we are looking at this picture right here, that it would take 10,000 years to make up a nanosecond, which is like 1/1000th of a second, or is it a millisecond? That throws it off too here, and that's where we are now in reference to seeing it here, like the guy just getting close but still able to escape from a black hole that's in your proximity. You're not parked up against it, or even in its parking lot. In fact, you can just barely see the sign in the distance, and you've definitely got the effect going on. But if you were able to stop yourself from that and not be trapped in it, the variation between what we are now, way time is, way we've got everything figured out, and where we figured out the 14.6 billion years all from, follow me, actually has no bearing on the amount of time it took for that to become the singularity that exploded. With that strange equation, they figured out, it would be just easier than to explain it, to just say infinity, and that had it always been there. Think about that. That the gross distortion of time versus what we go off of today ends up equating to the fact of it happens so slow, and they can't even get close to the entity while it's happening, where everything is, where time is created, to the point that infinity. Well, I mean, come on, you've got, 14 point something billion years or whatever, da da da. And he goes, no, we actually don't have a word for the thing, in trillion, quadrillion, da da da, and everything. We don't, Google? No, we don't have a word for it. And then it would be it to the power of something. You follow me? I know that's fall down a rabbit hole pretty deep there, but that in effect is what our universe here comes from. When this cloud is exploding, it's actually not exploding. There are things coming together. It explodes, and then whoosh, it burns, melts everything, fractionates, creates so much heat that everything is reduced into particles of atoms, and then they all start forming again. Whether they already had iron and high metals and the top half of the periodic table or not, if they did, it wouldn't matter, because all matter is shattered and fractionated. Everything is like in a certain situation where it's exploded. Everything. It's hard to wrap your head around it a little, but it gets to the point where, because of the mass of gravity, whenever it creates this start or before and the preemptive coming in on itself, it is so slow, it's forever, perpetual. One could easily say the collapse of the last galaxy, or whatever you want to call it, was here, that comes in and makes a singularity and explodes. That timeline we could never actually represent in any way that would be understandable, comprehensible. We talk about, whenever I was a kid, and 10 years is forever, because when I get 10 years older, I'll be able to drive a car. And it took forever for 10 years. No, we're talking about something that, to visibly see any movement whatsoever, if you were able to put all the things that you've got in science and everything over it and watch these light beams that are stuck coming off of this, that it would take billions of years to go, I think it has moved since we first detected. Compare these two shots. Do you think it's moved a width of an atom or two? So the idea that we're 14 billion years gets destroyed on the idea that things are going out of our vision, and when they are, it's already formed in galaxies and situations. So that's not a rationale off of it. What's the real number there? Well, we can converge everything back, and about the time it exploded was about this time here. But then again, that time is not correct. It gets to a point there, and then it just starts accelerating, and then multiplying, and then compounding, and then doing something else, and it shoots through the roof off of enough graph paper to go across the universe. You follow me? Hopefully you have. I've tried to say it a little flavorful, a couple of different ways now, but this idea of this Big Bang from a point is not actually rationally true. All things coming from nothing. I mean, it could be an effect. We could be on the other side of if when all these come together, part of this shoots out like a vent, but when it does, there's so much nuclear freak out with it that it punches a hole through our universe into another universe. Somehow, black hole effect, you know, black hole effect times millions, billions. There's a lot of things that could be possible. I mean, this is really just living in a quantum dream here, if you will, somehow looking upon it, trying to get some rationale here. But you know, whenever you're a kid, it took forever to get to your next birthday, and then it seems to be shorter and shorter in time as you grow old. That's an effect people have noticed for all of written history. But there's another idea here that time is relative. And we've established a time here on our planet that works with everything quite well. The seasons and all that, and so much more I go into all of my videos about, but this concept here gets to the point where all of a sudden E equals MC squared doesn't quite work. In fact, it does, it falls apart. It shatters, everything falls apart into pieces whenever this Big Bang happens, and preemptively to it when it explodes and everything gets fractionated into its smallest self and reforms other simple nuclear, you know, the belief is the bottom third of the periodic table is all that gets created whenever this happens, which I don't know if that would be the effect or not. If the sun dies and it creates this, then wouldn't this create a lot of stuff too? There's ways of looking at this, of saying that there are all these distant cosmoses we see accelerating away from us, never made it back to the center, and weren't close enough to this explosion wherever it happened to really have the effect that we're giving it for the whole universe and everything, even those distant galaxies that are redshifted 14.6 billion years away. And that this explosion is what pushed them away. That it would get to a point before everything could get to that singular point and explode. And when it did, everything would simultaneously explode. There's no way to describe the amount of convergent energy that would be going on here. There's no way to describe it. It again gets to be one of those weird, stupid high numbers to the power of oh my God. And creation. People in a modern day realize that we didn't have some special space god. It's actually much more viable that some alien from this place that's 14 billion years ago found us somehow, and probably from our own galaxy someplace, looking at the way things all would work out regardless of their speed of their ship, even if they could get up to 0.89 speed of light, things like that, and get here. In fact, whenever they'd be getting here, they would just be detecting that there were the right stuff for life, whether there is or not, would not be detectable. Just like we're looking at distant galaxies and stars and things away, and they'd have to be inside of our galaxy to get any indication that there's any type of life at all, or a methane type of thing, and and let's go check that out. In fact, they could have figured it out billions of years ago and sent people on a generational starcraft to get here at a certain time. But it gets to a point where that kind of falls apart too, and so it would have to be somebody fairly close to us, and then you'd be able to do it fairly easy. If they were looking at us even from another galaxy to here and somehow be able to detect our sun and have such equipment that they could be like, and there's a planet around it, and when it passed in front of the sun, we checked the corona around it, and here's the stats. To be able to head here and even be here when we think aliens have already come. In fact, it's just as possible that this is ourselves somehow that got off the planet before and went through a time dilation, and now us in the future is coming back, if you want to believe in the alien idea. Again, I mentioned I've got this elf on the shelf next to a huge Christmas tree box full of, well, what's this all about? Just did a video recently about it, showing a cave painting that they deemed as being meeting the gods, and it looks like a spaceship, and it's got light coming off of it, shadows and everything, and that's a pretty good representation right there. You could see that in a children's book, or pretty much almost a real book. But it got targeted and bombed in World War II whenever there weren't even supposedly people in the area or anything, or no reason to bomb that. Who wanted to make that go away? That's probably for other videos. Anyhow, I've probably said enough about this moment in time, but understand that this moment in time took forever, in the literal sense of the word. And then due to that gravity, to get to the point where we're looking at it here when everything's starting to go apart, would have taken forever. And leading up to and reverse this picture of sinking in and exploding, would have taken forever for even you to notice that there's a slight change. And so to get from this point to the point of the singularity, and let's say we're the thing that goes from where we are now to the center of it, and whenever we get to the center of it, we all explode. This would be like your kid waiting for your next birthday party to the power of 1,000,000. How long would it take? Well, literally forever. Like, we don't have a number that'll represent that idea. We've got to put a stupid number out there and the power of a stupid number to even get anywhere close of it. Something that, you just can't fathom. You think of these archaeoastronomy people and astronomers and everything, and pulling off these 14 billion years stuff, and then they put something like this into the idea and equation, and it's unfathomable for people that understand 14.2 versus 13.6. Oh, that's so different. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, check this out. Almost like thinking we're only 4,000 years old as opposed to 4.32 billion years old. Or worse. Anyhow, that's about enough, guys. Like, share, and subscribe. We'll get on to something else. Just a thought here on the side. Watch the documentary. Peace.